Okay, so let's have a look at the learning outcomes. I have covered every single learning outcome in each slide, and uske alawa bhi, based on questions, I've added some extra stuff, and in the end, I'll be showing you people images of emphysema and bronchitis, which have often been assessed in your exam. Okay, so now, first of all, we have the difference between breathing and respiration. So which one is a physical process and which one is a chemical process?
Breathing is physical and respiration is chemical.
Respiration is chemical.
Yes, correct. Okay, so respiration is a chemical process and breathing is a physical process. Respiration and breathing both take place all the time. If you stop breathing or if you stop respiration, then you won't be able to survive. Now, breathing only takes place in the lungs. Why? Because it is the exchange of gases between a person or an organism and the environment. तो अगर मेरे अंदर कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड जा रही है और मुझसे बाहर जो है वो मेरे अंदर ऑक्सीजन भी जा रही है एंड मुझसे बाहर भी निकल रही है ऑक्सीजन और कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड, तो दैट मीन्स आई एम जस्ट ब्रीदिंग, लंग्स में जा रही है और लंग्स से आ रही है, ठीक है. बट रेस्पिरेशन इज द ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ एनर्जी, is the breakdown of glucose to produce energy. So this is something that happens at cellular level. Every single cell respires to survive and perform its functions. So breathing will take place in the lungs, respiration will take place in cells. Okay? Respiration is the breakdown of glucose to provide energy. Breathing is the exchange of gases between a person and their environment. Okay? And in breathing, you take in oxygen from the environment, but in respiration, you use that inhaled oxygen to perform respiration, and then energy is produced. Okay? Then the byproduct of respiration is carbon dioxide, and breathing removes that carbon dioxide out from the nasal passage. Okay? Now, what is aerobic respiration? Aerobic respiration is respiration in the presence of oxygen. Cells respire when they have oxygen in the environment. So, what's the basic definition of respiration? There's a difference between the definitions of respiration, aerobic respiration, and anaerobic respiration. Respiration is the release of energy from food substances in all living cells. There are no conditions in this definition. It's the release of energy. Energy is being released or produced from food substances in living cells. Aerobic respiration is the release of a large amount of energy by the breakdown of food substances in the presence of oxygen. We have a condition, oxygen, and we have a result, large amounts of energy. So glucose is oxidized, oxygen के साथ react करके you have carbon dioxide formed, water formed, and ATP, which is energy. ठीक है? And why do we need this energy? We need it for muscular contractions. सही है? Energy is needed for us to survive, for us to live, for us to perform our work. So it's needed for mechanical work, for contraction of your skeletal gut, heart, cardiac muscles, for contraction of diaphragm and intercostal muscles that make respiration possible in the first place. So yeah, then it is required for the synthesis of protein, which are building materials for enzymes, hormones, glycogen, fats, etc. It is responsible for cell division, mitosis, growth, and repair. It is responsible for active transport that is required for the absorption of food. It is required for chemical work, for example, the transmission of nerve impulses, and it is required for homeostasis to maintain a constant temperature. That is why aerobic respiration or respiration is very important to us. These are a lot of uses, and if they ask you to describe the uses of energy or describe the importance of respiration, then you just won't write muscular contraction, but you'll elaborate it just like I elaborated it. What's the difference between anaerobic and aerobic? Anaerobic में you have an N, so it means no oxygen. इससे N से याद रखो. Anaerobic, no oxygen. Aerobic, in the presence of oxygen. So in anaerobic, glucose is broken down, but in aerobic, glucose and oxygen react. In anaerobic, you have incomplete combustion of glucose. And in anaerobic, glucose completely combusts to form carbon dioxide and water. When I say something combusts completely, it means that carbon dioxide and water are the results. Okay, so complete combustion means you have CO2. So you have carbon dioxide and water. Now anaerobic yields less energy and aerobic respiration yields a large amount of energy. Can someone tell me the exact number in kilojoules for the amount of energy yielded by aerobic respiration? किसी को approximate याद है, किसी को exact value याद है, जल्दी से बताओ. Yes, Ibrahim, you're close. It's 2,898 kilojoules of energy. 2898 kilojoules of energy. सही है? And in anaerobic respiration, you have very little amounts of energy. ठीक है? Now, aerobic respiration में the products are carbon dioxide and water, as I discussed. But in anaerobic, दो अलग-अलग types की होती हैं. In animals and in yeast. In animals, you have lactic acid produced, and in yeast, you have carbon dioxide and ethanol produced. Aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria. Cytoplasm में तो होती है, but mitochondria में mainly होती है because they require oxygen. However, mitochondria में anaerobic respiration नहीं हो सकती है. You can use that in fermentation, anaerobic, and aerobic you can use that in your daily life. So these examples are not very important to memorize. So what's anaerobic respiration? It's the release of a relatively small amount of energy by the breakdown of food substances in the absence of oxygen. For aerobic, we had a release of relatively large amounts of energy by the breakdown of food substances in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic has the exact opposite definition. In yeast, you have glucose decomposing to form alcohol, carbon dioxide, and a small amount of energy. In animals, you have glucose decomposing to produce lactic acid and energy. And these symbols are very important to memorize. C2H5OH for alcohol and C3H6O3 for animals, for lactic acid. This question has often come in past papers and MCQs. What's the product of anaerobic respiration in muscles? We say anaerobic respiration in humans occurs in the muscles. So the answer is given in terms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So it's not going to be C2H5OH, it's going to be C3H6O3. So you need to have that memorized. Now, what happens when you exercise? What effect does it have on your body? So when you run fast, we saw that lactic acid is produced in anaerobic respiration. Your oxygen is used up. When you are exercising, your muscles need more and more oxygen, and then there comes a point in which there is too little oxygen, but you still need more energy to carry out your exercises. So what happens? Then you start respiring anaerobically. The muscle cells start respiring anaerobically because they have a lack of oxygen. Then what happens? Lactic acid is produced. Now this lactic acid causes severe pain and cramps. So that's why you then, after strenuous exercise, you feel pain in your sides. And then now you start breathing very fast, and that extra oxygen that you inhale, that helps you to oxidize that lactic acid to carbon dioxide and water. And when that lactic acid starts to break down, and when you stop exercise and you breathe fast and you take in that oxygen, so what happens then? The pain starts to disappear. Lactic acid is also produced in your mouth. This is just additional information that it is produced in the mouth and it causes tooth decay. Now, what is oxygen debt? as the muscle cells are respiring anaerobically, you need more oxygen now after exercise is over to oxidize that lactic acid, and that amount of oxygen required to oxidize lactic acid is known as oxygen depth. So oxygen depth is the amount of oxygen needed to oxidize the accumulated lactic acid, and in liver some of the lactic acid is oxidized while the remaining is converted to glucose by the help of the energy released. This is known as detoxification, and it occurs during the oxidation of lactic acid molecules. And I think this question has also come in past papers. Here is a graph that shows time and consumption of oxygen by your body that has been plotted against time. And ab yahan, see, over here, you had started exercise as the amount of oxygen you consumed started to increase, and then when you stopped exercise, your oxygen consumption started to decrease, and the area under the curve now shows oxygen depth, that is the extra volume that is needed to restore all the energetic systems. And now by this time, this is the normal amount of oxygen that you are inhaling. What happens to the pulse rate when exercise increases? Obviously, there's an increase in pulse rate. Why? Because your muscles require more energy, they require more blood. So the blood has to pump more oxygen to the muscles. What happens to the rate and depth of breathing while you exercise? So what happens? The depth and the rate of breathing obviously increases, so that more oxygen is absorbed and more carbon dioxide is removed. This can be explained from this graph. Now, if you just have a look at this, so this shows the tidal air that is around 500 millimeters for normal humans, and this is the normal volume that you inhale. Then the large changes in the graph show that an athlete has exercised, and athletes can take up maximum of 3000 milliliters of air in their lungs. The extra air that you take above the tidal capacity is known as the complemental air. All of this is the complemental air, and below it is known as the supplemental air. And then this volume that is left below your graph is known as the residual volume. Now you inhale air and then you exhale it, but there are some changes that happen to the composition of it. We all know that that air contains 21% oxygen, 79% nitrogen, 0.03 to 0.04% carbon dioxide, and water vapor amount is variable. The temperature is also variable, depends on where you live, in which area you are, what is the season, what is the temperature of the place you are in. So you inhale 20% oxygen, but since you use up a lot of it, 16% is exhaled out. You inhale 0.04%, but cells also excrete carbon dioxide as waste, so 4% is exhaled out. This is very important, and you need to memorize this. Nitrogen remains unchanged. Water vapor was initially variable, but when it is exhaled, the air is saturated with water vapor, which means no more water can be added to air. And the temperature is around body temperature, which is 37 degrees Celsius. Now, I quickly want you all to tell me in the chat box the answers for 1 to 11. So then you have an increased rate of diffusion. Then the wall of alveoli and blood capillaries are just one cell thick. Again, shorter distance to cover, so efficient diffusion. So yeah, now what happens
basically
to...
the factors affecting diffusion आ जाएंगे सारी इसके adaptation से.
Yes. सही है. Surface area, कितना moist है, ठीक है, and then the distance, mainly यही है ना. अच्छा, उसके बाद this is what happens, you have a capillary and deoxygenated blood आ रहा होता है हमेशा से, ठीक है. Then diffusion होती है, जैसे alveoli के पास होता है. अब क्या होता है, देखो यहाँ पे क्यों नहीं हो रहा diffusion, क्योंकि concentration gradient नहीं है. जब तक you don't have another gas, तो कोई डिफ्यूजन होगी नहीं. यहाँ पे when it comes near, तो क्योंकि एयर इनहेल होगी और एयर के अंदर जो है वो 21% ऑक्सीजन है, तो कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड डिफ्यूज करती है ताकि जो है ना वो बैलेंस होने लगे और ऑक्सीजन अंदर आती रहती है एंड दिस ब्लड नाउ बिकम्स ऑक्सीजनेटेड एज कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड गोes out and oxygen moves in and as the capillaries leave they carry oxygenated blood with them. सही है. अब उसके बाद we have cilia. ठीक है, cilia are hair like projections and they help to trap mucus and they clean your passageway. ठीक है, they have a beating movement. तो उससे they where do they move the cilia? जाता कहाँ है? cilia mucus को move करके कहाँ भेजता है? ऊपर का ट्रैकिया से सही है, माउथ और नोज से बाहर आ गया. अगर नहीं ऊपर नहीं गया देन स्टमक में जाएगा. HCl उसको मैंने पढ़ा था कि सीलिया को ट्रैप कर लेता है. वो तो स्मोकर सी केस में होता है. HCl स्टमक में जाता है. HCl का pH इतना लो होता है, इट डिस्ट्रॉयज द बैक्टीरिया एंड देन वो डाइजेस्ट हो गया अनडाइजेस्टेड मटेरियल्स के साथ जो है वो एक्सक्रीट हो जाता है. सही है. अच्छा, उसके बाद एक और चीज ये थी alveoli में कि they are well ventilated, they receive a regular fresh supply of air, तो वो concentration gradient को maintain रखता है. ठीक है. Then the breathing mechanisms, ये कैसे याद होगा? Inhalation में what happens? When we inhale, what happens to the external intercostal muscles? External intercostal muscles contract and internal relax. ये याद रखो, inhalation का I है ना, तो external का E opposite होगा. जो जिस inhalation का I है तो internal जो है वो relax करेंगे और external contract करेंगे. And external जो करता है वो diaphragm करता है. When the diaphragm contracts, it moves downwards. Diaphragm flattens. Diaphragm contracts and flattens. So when we inhale air, external intercostal muscles contract. As a result, internal intercostal muscles relax. The diaphragm contracts and flattens. The ribs move upwards and outwards. The thoracic cavity expands and up. You have more space for air. When you exhale, the external intercostal muscles relax because the internal intercostal muscles have contracted. The diaphragm relaxes and moves upwards. The chest moves inwards and downwards, and the chest moves upwards and inwards. जगह छोटी हो जाती है अगर तुम लोग लंग्स के साइज में डिफरेंस कर. एंड यू कैन नाउ एयर इज बीइंग पुश्ड आउट. एयर प्रेशर की वजह से ना प्रेशर अब बढ़ता है ना, छोटी जगह हो जाती है तो वो पुश आउट हो जाता है. जब प्रेशर कम होता है तो एयर अंदर आती रहती है. ठीक है. ओके, अब लेट्स कम टू द फंक्शंस. यहाँ पे आ जाता है सब स्ट्रक्चर्स पे. तो सबसे पहले वी हैव द नेजल पैसेज. ठीक है, यू हैव एक्सटर्नल नॉस्ट्रल्स, देन यू हैव टू नेजल पैसेजेस एंड यू हैव टू इंटरनल नॉस्ट्रल्स. इनका क्या फंक्शन होता है जल्दी से मुझे कोई बताए. Which trap the dust particles. They have hair, not cilia. They trap the dust particles, including the bacteria in the air. ठीक है. So the nasal passage is lined by moist mucus, and that is trapping dust, bacteria, and foreign particles. ठीक है. अच्छा, आपकी नोज के अंदर ना सेंसरी सेल्स होते हैं. दिस सेंस की म्यूकस आ गया है. ठीक है. एंड नोज जो है ना वो क्या करता है, एयर को वार्म भी करता है. तो एक प्रॉपर टेम्परेचर भी आ जाता है, उसको मॉइस्टन भी करता है, और सेंसरी सेल्स जो है ना वो हार्मफुल केमिकल्स को डिटेक्ट कर लेते हैं. देन यू हैव फेरिंग्स. ठीक है. फेरिंग्स इज व्हाट? इट्स अ कॉमन पैसेज फॉर योर फूड एंड योर एयर. ठीक है. एयर एंटर्स फ्रॉम द नेजल पैसेज एंड देन इट मूव्स इनटू द फेरिंग्स, एंड फेरिंग्स से वो लैरिंग्स जाता है, एंड देन लैरिंग्स से वो ट्रैकिया जाता है थ्रू an opening called glottis that has a lid called epiglottis. Then you have trachea. It lies in front of your esophagus. You can see over here. It extends downwards from the larynx into the thoracic cavity. And how is it kept open? How is the trachea kept open? No, C-shaped rings of cartilage. इनकी हेल्प से होता है. ठीक है. अच्छा, उसके बाद you have the bronchi. They are now lined with guard cells and cilia. The gland cells and cilia. Gland cells are secreting mucus that help trap dust particles and bacteria. Cilia helps to sweep the trapped particles into the pharynx and then they're swallowed into the esophagus. Either nose or mouth से आता है या फिर esophagus से swallow होके stomach तक जाता है, वहां मारे जाता है. ठीक है? Okay. अब bronchioles हैं. Again there are division of bronchi की division है, and there at the end they have cluster of alveoli. अच्छा, bronchioles do not have cartilage. They're not supported by cartilage. They're just an air passage that move air into the alveolar air sacs. Then you have thoracic cavity. They are a hollow region and they just possess the gas exchange system between carbon dioxide and oxygen. Okay, then you have your ribs. Jackie ribs, and they're supporting the thoracic cavity, they're supporting the chest wall, and they're attached dorsally to the backbone. What does that mean, dorsally to the backbone? And externally to the sternum. And then they're attached externally to the sternum, or sternum is also known as the chest bone. Okay, and there are two free floating ribs. 10 pairs are attached directly, and there are two free floating ribs as well. The ribs support the chest wall, they protect the lungs and the heart, and they involve in the breathing mechanism. With the chest, the ribs also move. Diaphragm is a dome-shaped sheet of muscle and elastic tissue. Muscles and elastic tissues. They contract. When they contract, so they flatten, and when they relax, so they arc upwards. They change the volume of the thoracic cavity, and they involve in the breathing mechanism. The internal and external are antagonistic muscles. अब इसमें question आता है कि why do muscles have to be in pairs? 2 marks. कौन answer करेगा? Opposite work करते हैं तो why do they have to be in pairs? Why do you need muscles in pairs?
कि जो एक काम करेगा उसका ऑपोजिट दूसरा करेगा.
इसका आंसर होता है for 2 mark question. Remember this, इसको याद रखना अगर ये आ गया कभी. Muscles can only contract. ठीक है? If I just have a sheet of muscle relax नहीं करता है. एक contract करता है तो उसका antagonistic relax करता है. कभी मैं ये नहीं कहूंगी कि इसने relax किया उसकी वजह से दूसरे ने contract किया. Muscles can only contract due to which you need relaxation लाने के लिए you need them to be in pairs. Antagonistic muscles work opposite to each other. When one contracts, the other relaxes. That's why you need muscles in pairs. सबसे important is the point ये है कि muscles can only contract. They cannot relax. ठीक है? And these two muscles they change the volume of the thoracic cavity. Lungs, अच्छा lungs किस cavity में होता है और कौन सा fluid होता है और किस membrane के साथ covered होता है? नहीं, chest cavity नहीं. कौन बताएगा? P से start होता है. नहीं. हाँ. Pleural cavity होती है, pleural membrane से surrounded होता है, and pleural fluid होता है. Can I repeat what else? ठीक है, and the pleural fluid helps to protect the lungs. Pleural वाली बात, it's Pleural. The lungs are found in the pleural cavity. ठीक है, they are surrounded by the pleural fluid and they are covered by the pleural membrane. They help to protect the lungs. सही है? अच्छा, उसके बाद अब ना, just wait. So what happens is alveolar walls break down and they fuse together. So this decreases the surface area. Capacity decrease हो जाती है lungs की, and इसकी वजह से मसले होते हैं. अब ये देखो, ये क्वेश्चन आ जाता है, हमें दी थी फोटो माइक्रोग्राफ्स 2 की और एक आता है आइडेंटिफाई करें इस कंडीशन को. दैट्स एम्फाइसेमा. हुआ क्या है? एल्वियोलर वॉल्स हैव ब्रोकन डाउन, सरफेस एरिया डिक्रीज हुआ, इसकी वजह से कैपेसिटी डिक्रीज हुई है. तो ये सब कुछ मेंशन करना है और इसको लिंक करना है पूरा कोरोनरी हार्ट डिजीज से. 5 मार्क का क्वेश्चन आया था डायग्राम्स के साथ. कोरोनरी हार्ट डिजीज से लिंक करना है. ठीक है, लंग्स अच्छा तुम लोगों ने ये सब कुछ किया है कि टार निकोटीन वगैरह क्या करते हैं?
हाँ बट मुझे ज्यादा याद नहीं है।
अच्छा वो तुम लोग को ड्रग यूज एंड अब्यूज में करना होगा probably। ये देखो नॉन स्मोकर और स्मोकर की टार डिपॉजिट हो जाती हैं। एंड व्हाट इज ब्रोंक
किस चीज का डिपॉजिट होता है?
आपके जाके एल्वियोलर वॉल्स के ऊपर, ठीक है। अच्छा ब्रोंकस ब्रोंकाइटिस क्या होता है? आइटिस इज यूज्ड फॉर स्वेलिंग, तो ब्रोंकियोल स्वेल कर जाते हैं, दिस डिजीज इज कॉल्ड ब्रोंकाइटिस, ठीक है। तो वो इस तरह से दे सकते हैं आपको, या तो नॉन स्मोकर स्मोकर की लंग्स, आइडेंटिफाई द डिफरेंस, इसको क्या हुआ है? टार डिपॉजिट हुआ है। एल्वियोलाई दे देंगे, इसको क्या हुआ है? वॉल्स ब्रेक डाउन हुई हैं, सरफेस एरिया रिड्यूस हुआ है, सब कुछ आपने 5 मार्क्स के लिए पॉइंट्स लिख दिए। या फिर आपको दिखाएंगे ब्रोंकियोल्स स्वेलो है, इसको क्या हुआ है? ब्रोंकियोल्स स्वेलो है, तो दैट इज ब्रोंकाइटिस।